So hello everybody, and a very warm welcome back here to the main stage for, if you're watching in the APAC region, for this evening's after hours session. So yeah, we're going to be looking now at specifically on WRC-23, and we have a session focusing specifically on where we are with preparations on key agenda items in the Asia Pacific region and globally. Yeah, we're delighted to have a excellent lineup of speakers once again with us. I think the fact that we are running this after hours means that we're able to invite speakers from all other different regions around the world. So we have an excellent global lineup of speakers from the policy side and the industry side with us today to discuss these issues and to look at some of the key positions and the key preparations ahead of WRC-23. In a second, I'm going to bring to the stage Mario Manovitz, who's going to be moderating the session. But just before I do, I just wanted to let you all know that this session is the first one this year that we're going to be using our audience polls on. So we do have two polls now live, which you can access using the polls tab on the right-hand side of your screen. So please do have a look at that now. Please vote on those polls. You'll see we have two questions. One of the questions is actually the same question as we asked last year, relating to what you see as the most prominent issues ahead of WRC-23. So we're asking that same question again, and I think we thought it'd be quite interesting to compare the results this year to what people said last year on that, and to see if there's any change, or if people are still thinking the same issues are those which are going to be the most prominent. So please do vote on those polls, and we'll be bringing those into the discussion towards the end of the session, and asking our panelists their thoughts on those as well. But for now, I would like to get things started by once again welcoming to the stage our moderator for the session, a man who needs no introduction, of course, Mario Manovitz from ITU. So Mario, welcome. Great to have you back here with us, and really looking forward to the session. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Dan. And good evening to all in the Asia Pacific region. And of course, also good afternoon and good morning to other colleagues that are joining from other sides of the world. It's a pleasure to be here with you again today. And we will start without further ado with our session. So as Dan mentioned, our session is about the preparations on key agenda items for WRC-23 in Asia Pacific, but also globally. As you know, all regional groups are preparing the regional positions for WRC-23. And at the end of this year, ITU will organize the first interregional workshop on WRC-23 preparations to try to harmonize these positions at the global level. So, as you know, it's very important that national positions be agreed upon in regional and transformed into regional positions, but the success of the conference is based on having those regional positions harmonized at the global level as well. So we have a series of 3 interregional workshops, the first of which will take place at the end of this year. So the other aspect I wanted to highlight is that many of the key agenda items in this cycle are predominantly focused on regions 1 and 2, but this doesn't mean that they are not of huge importance to stakeholders in the Asia Pacific region. Decisions related to the assignment of key bands, such as the 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz and 6 gigahertz, will have a big impact on the overall global ecosystem, regardless of the region. So let's hear from the chairman of some of the regional groups to start with about the status of their preparations and the emerging positions in their respective regions. I would like to start with the region that is hosting this conference, the Asia Pacific, and then I'm happy to invite the chairman of the APG-23, Mr. Ki-Jun Wee, for him to tell us about the status of the preparations in the Asia Pacific region. Dr. Wee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mario. And I appreciate the Dan to organize this opportunity. And also I appreciate the other regional groups chairmen to share their reasons, information. The reason I say my appreciation to the other regional group chairs that one of the most key is the collaboration of the regional groups. So in this regard, I really appreciate joining the other groups' chairmen to these sessions. Also, I appreciate GSMA and EBU and Intelsat provide the view. Having said that, let me introduce the what Asia Pacific is preparing and how we prepare the WRC-23. And then the second page is, first of all, this is the APT. In this figure, we have 38 members, and we are founded in the 1979 as a joint initiatives of the United Nations ESCAP and the ITU. So we were born both of the UN ESCAP and the ITU. And we, APT, is preparing not only the WRC, major ITU conference, the plenipotentiaries or WTSA, WTDC, etc. And then next slide, please. Okay, so in other words, some features of the APT is, particularly the radio frequency management point of view. The first word is the diversity. Geographical diversity, technology development diversities, economic development diversities, etc., etc. So diversity is one of the key features of the APT. Also, we have a very lengthy border with the region 1, and half of the members are island countries. More than half of the population of the world is in the Asia-Pacific regions. Also, mobile and the fixed service are allocated in many blocks of the table of frequency allocations. So I really appreciate that those precedents who made this maybe 60, 70 years ago, so that nowadays APT members are not so busy, particularly during this WRC-23. I will explain a little bit more. In that, the region 3 is, I believe, that is a small planet who take care of the both mobile service and the satellite service together. Next slide, please. So as I already mentioned, that the APG is one of the APT work program is responsible to prepare the WRC and radio communication assembly as well. So APG also prepared the CPM and other ITU study activity as well. Next slide. So this is our management team. The chairman is myself, and we have two vice chairmen. One, Madame Zhu from China, Mr. Abe from Japan. Also, we have a chairman of the editorial committee. He is a very important committee to manage the all documents of the APG. Also, we have a special senior advisor, Mr. Arasta. We are 5 working parties. It's very similar structure with the CPM structure. However, the responsible agenda item is slightly different. So I want to read it to you for your review later. Next slide, please. Okay, today I only picked up some mobile issues only. Maybe next year I will may explain the other agenda item as well, but today only mobile issues. Agenda item 1.1, the members' view are divided. One part of the members says that the 9.21 is not enough. So PFD and protection of the aeronautical mobile and the maritime mobile service located in the international airspace or waters. So that's the one view. The other view is they want to use the IMT systems without restrictions from other services in the international airspace and the waters. So totally opposite directions. Some members says, no, we don't need even PFD limit. So I think that the 1.1 is a hot topic for Asia Pacific regions. Next slide, please. Agenda item 1.2. In generally, we are very favoring global identification of the only 100 megahertz, 7025 to 7125. That's the only relevant to the region 3 considerations. However, we know that the other bands also has some impact in future to our regions, not through the radio regulations, but anyhow in the market. So next APG meeting, we need to discuss whether we make sure that our preliminary review to certain certainty on this 100 megahertz bands. And also we will discuss the impact of the possible IMT identification of the other regions to the service of the region 3. Also, we may need to discuss the global impact to the EESS, which is operated at 10 to 10.4 gigahertz bands from the identification of the region 2. So that would be next meeting's discussion topic. Next slide, please. Regarding the agenda item 1.3, we are almost free, but as a APT preliminary review, the mobile allocations in region 3 should not have any adverse effect to the region 3. That is the preliminary review. And then one of the observation is that WRC decisions may need to consider the current regulatory conditions, which is applied lower or upper bands for the contiguous utilization of the so-called IMT. So that is that was raised during last meetings. Next slide, please. All right, agenda item 1.4 is HIPS. Actually, this agenda item was initiated by the Asia Pacific region during last WRC-19. So the preliminary review, I don't need to read that, but in general, the Asia Pacific members' view is positive to HIPS. But I don't know how many countries would introduce this platform in their countries, but considering the agenda item, Asia Pacific region is positive. That's my feeling. Also, there's one more topic, which is a HIPS gateway link And that is not the scope of the agenda item, but Asia Pacific region will study how we use the HIPS gateway link, but separating from the preparation of the WRC agenda item. Next slide. So agenda item 1.4, 1.5 is also not the Asia Pacific agenda. So we are very free. And then there are several observations. But the last point in this slide, that the decision on this agenda item would influence to the use of the spectrum in Asia Pacific region in future. All right, and next point is next slide, please. The topic 9.1.c. Up to date, no consensus yet on whether study or the results of the WRC would need to change the radio regulations. Most of the members doesn't believe that way, but some members still they need to kind of the regulatory changes. And the resolution 175 says the use of international mobile telecommunication systems. But in the third bullet, the Working Party 5A and the 5C says these objectives is the use of the IMT technologies, not IMT systems, for fixed wireless broadband in the fixed service, and not the deployment of the mobile system in the fixed service. And then definition of the terminologies, the fixed wireless broadband. Now there's a correspondence group under the Working Party 5A, so Asia Pacific region will continue to participate in that activity as well. Next page, please. Finally, the preliminary review on the radio regulation, Article 21.5. The first two bullets are current preliminary review. So I would like to leave it to you to read that. And some observation is, this Article 21.5 has been applied more than 50 years without any trouble to use the spectrum between satellite and mobile fixed service. This issue does not have any associated WRC resolutions. This is not the topic, this is not the agenda item, this is the caused by the WRC plenary documents. So which specify what study is required for modification of the radio regulations, but without such associated WRC resolutions, it's not clear what study has to be done. Then every aspects of the technology development of not only the mobile, but also satellite should be studied before reached conclusions. So next slide, please. The meeting schedules of the APG3 is we have met 2 times, last year and this year, last month. And then next year, we planned only one, but still we are discussing. Maybe we may need to meet 2 times for next year. Also, year 2002 and the 2003. So we hope that next year we can see each other in some places. Next slide, please. So today I only explained the mobile agenda, but if you click this, and then you can find all APT preliminary review on the all other agenda items as well. So thank you very much, Mario.
Thanks very much, KJ, for a very clear presentation. A quick question before you leave, because I know you won't be able to stay until the discussion at the end of the panel. So in the poll, if you had the opportunity to respond to that question, if you think that WRC-23 will be dominated by IMT-related issues or not, what would you say? Just quickly, just as a wrap-up.
All right, thank you. During this WRC-23, only 1.1 is critical for Asia-Pacific regions. And the other agenda item may be easier for Asia-Pacific regions. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks again. So we've heard from the Asia-Pacific region, so now we would like to hear also from the European group. So the next speaker is Mr. Alexander Kolob, who is the chairman of the working group for the preparation of WRC-23 from the CEPT. Alexander, welcome. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mario. And good afternoon to you. Good evening, dear colleagues from APT region, and of course, good morning to those who joined from another time zone. I suppose you will interrupt me if you can hear me or can see me. And before I start with my presentation, I would like to thank Dan and his team in the Forum Global for inviting me to attend this session. I will speak on behalf of the CPT here, and I'm indeed happy to share with the participants information about our regional preparations for the next World Radio Conference. Next slide, please. As way of introduction, I thought it is necessary to say a few words about our organization, CPT. It stands for the European Conference of Postal and Telecommunication Administrations. CPT is a voluntary association of 48 European countries. And policymakers and regulators from these 48 countries collaborate to harmonize telecommunications, radio spectrum, and postal regulation, of course, to improve efficiency and coordination for the benefit of the European society. The CPT conducts its work through three autonomous business committees: the Electronic Communication Committee, the Committee for ITU Policy, and the European Committee for Postal Regulation. And it is within the ECC where a working group on conference preparation, so-called CPG, is established and which I have honor to chair. Next slide, please. CPT is a place where CPT administrations, as well as numerous observers, meet, discuss, and agree on European positions in preparation for ITU World Ratification Conferences and Ratification Assemblies. At the end of the study cycle, we develop and approve European common proposals. And in order for a proposal to become an ECP, European Common Proposal, it should be supported by at least 10 members and should not be opposed by more than 6 members. We also prepare positions and contributions to different ITR meetings dealing with the conference preparation. And CPG is also in direct communication and coordination with other regional groups. And this is indeed a very important part of our work. As was also said by Dr. V in the beginning of his presentation, the dialogue between regions is very important for the success of the conference. Next slide, please. CPG is composed by 5 project teams, each with a well-defined scope and area of responsibilities. In particular, we have a project team dealing with scientific and general issues, and project team dealing with space issues, another one dealing with aeronautical, maritime and radio location issues that we group all this term under the term transport. And we also have a group dealing with IMT matters. And finally, we have separated UHF discussions into a dedicated group. Such organization allows us to follow closely and to contribute to the ITOR studies in responsible working parties and task group. As far as possible, every agenda item or topic is led within CPG by a CPT coordinator. These people, coordinators, they are our working horses at CPG and project team meetings, and are our spokesperson in ITOR meetings, and of course at the conference itself. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the agenda of the next conference. It contains 19 different items and 4 topics that, generally speaking, fall into 4 categories of issues. It becomes now a tradition that a World Radio Conference deals with mobile broadband questions. So next conference is not an exception. Another broad category of agendas is dealing with satellite questions. Some of them aim to enhance the usage of existing satellite spectrum allocations, whereas some others seek for more spectrum for satellites. A number of items on the agenda of next conference deals with, as I said previously, with aeronautical maritime services. And as I said, we call them all transport issues. And the first group of agenda items deals with science issues. I should probably observe here that this agenda has been compiled to a large extent following the proposals from CPT. So we are behind a number of proposals, and we are equally interested that the conference resolve all the issues raised. I may nevertheless point out to 2 agenda items that, in my view, will likely be highly contentious and time-consuming at the next conference. I mean, the review of the UHF band. This is not an APT issue, but it will have impact on stakeholders also in APT. Another hot or high-profile agenda items is a possible IMT certification in the mid-bands. I would like also to add that for nearly all agenda items and topics, CPT started to build up its preliminary CPT position. And I will use the next slides to share with you some of them. In view of the time I have, I will only touch upon the mobile and satellite chapters on the agenda of the next conference. Next slide, please. Well, here I show all the frequency bands touched by the mobile agenda items. On some of them, CPG has agreed already on the preliminary CPT position. Starting with the band 3.3, 3.4 gigahertz, this frequency band is extensively used by different types of radars, terrestrial, maritime, aeronautical, and we don't foresee any change in the usage on a long-term basis. And because of the incompatibility between radio location and mobile IMT services in co-channel, and thus the need for large co-channel separation distances, this band is not supported for IMT. As far as the frequency band 3.6, 3.8 gigahertz is concerned, it is already designated for broadband mobile within CPT, and there is a primary mobile location in this frequency band in the European Common Table of allocations. Therefore, we are likely to support an upgrade of the mobile service to the primary status in region 1, of course. However, we would need to be sure that the existing CPT regulatory framework for mobile broadband in this band will be continued with no impact. Next slide, please. Now moving on to the band 4.8, 4.99 gigahertz, the one that seems to be contentious within APT. We all recall now what Dr. V told us. And those who attended the previous conference remember for sure long and intense debates on this band as far as IMT certification for some countries is concerned. The last conference made also a decision on the need for studies to address the protection of aeronautical mobile service and mobile maritime service stations, which are located in international airspace and international waters. In this respect, CPT is of the view that the proper PFD limit is to be used for such protection. Another band where we have already preliminary view is the 10 GHz band. The consideration for IMT is for region 2 only. However, this band is used by active and passive ESSS, Earth Exploration Satellite services, and these services have global coverage and might thus be impacted if this band is identified for IMT. Therefore, for CPT, it is highly important that such potential identification does not impose any additional regulatory or technical constraints on active and passive ESSS stations. And the last topic that I will touch today under the mobile agenda items is in relation to the proposal to study the usage of IMT technologies in the frequency bands allocated to the primary service. Apparently, it is becoming a hot topic in view of the recent discussions in Working Party 5A and 5C. Our position on it was established for a while already. In particular, we are of the view that no regulatory action is required, so there's no revision to the regulations in order to resolve this issue under this topic. And we strongly believe that this could and should be addressed through the revisions of existing ITR recommendations and reports. Next slide, please. Now, well, 2-3 minutes I will devote to the satellite chapter on the agenda before I wrap up. As said previously, some satellite agenda items seek to burst the current usage of satellite locations. Good examples here are so-called Earth stations in motions. And as far as Earth station in motions is in the KU band, communicating with GSO stations, we certainly support such operation, but under conditions that ensure the protection of existing services in band and adjacent bands. And notice that this band is so-called planned FSS band. The operation of such ESIM should be consistent with the procedures of the plan. Well, we have also the agenda item dealing with ESIM in the KA band, communicating this time with non-GSO satellites. And again, CPT is very supportive for such operation, provided that GSO networks and terrestrial services are protected. Next slide, please. And another category of satellite agenda items is when we want to provide additional spectrum for space communications. CPT is generally supportive for such idea. In this respect, as far as new spectrum for inter-satellite links in the KU and K bands are concerned, we would like to apply so-called the cone of coverage concept. Under this concept, in-satellite operations are allowed only between satellites that are within the cone of coverage of GSO or non-GSO services, which service provider that provides this service. And another example is related to the studies in region 2 to allocate spectrum for FSS. Given that frequency band is already allocated to FSS in region 1, we would support a similar allocation in region 2, which facilitates the use of spectrum available satellite networks and systems. Certainly, studies should show that the new allocation is feasible. Next slide. Moving back to the CPG itself, I just want to share with you some timeline towards the conference. We have planned in total 9 meetings for the whole study period, and we have had already 3 of them. The last one adjourned last Friday. Because of the ongoing COVID pandemic, all of these meetings were online. However, I have to admit here that this does not influence very much the progress we have achieved in developing our positions for the next conference. It is more or less comparable with previous study periods. And last slide, please. In terms of my final remarks, I would like to observe that the whole conference study cycle could be divided into 2 periods. The first one lasts until the beginning of the conference and is called the consensus-seeking studies. During this period, ITR, CPT, and all other regional organizations are conducting studies and are aiming to agree on them and their conclusions. In this regard, the preliminary positions start to emerge on many agenda items. At the conference itself, we will not conduct or analyze the study anymore. We will be in the process of consensus-seeking negotiations, and the quality of the studies conducted previously will determine the quality of these negotiations at the conference and the quality of the decisions the conference will take. Having said this, I would like to emphasize, again, one more time, the crucial role of dialogue and coordination between all regional groups, including between CPT and Asia Pacific community, for the success of the conference. With that, I end my presentation and would like to thank you all for your attention. If time permits, I would be more than happy to address any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alexander. Very clear presentation and very nice slides. So thanks a lot. I have also a quick question for you, as our audience is a bit shy still, but they normally warm up later in the session and they start bombarding with questions. So we were talking about building consensus on agenda items in order to harmonize positions for the conference. Do you see some of these agenda items that would be easier than others in order for this consensus building to be built rather quickly?
Okay, thank you very much, Mario. Well, generally speaking, if an item is on the agenda of the conference, it means already by default, this is not an easy issue. It requires 3,000 or so people to discuss it together. Certainly, for some agendas, it could be less complex to agree on the results of the studies than for some other agenda items. In this respect, I hope that scientific category of agenda items will be quicker to be resolved by the conference. I do not want, of course, to speculate here, especially noting the discussion of the previous conference on agenda item 1.3, upgrade of meteorological satellites, where the outcome was no change because we could not conquer on the PFD limits to protect services. However, hopefully, for at least some of the strategic items, a solution could not be so controversial to agree on. If I take an example, the first thing that comes to my mind is, for example, agenda item 113, possible upgrade of the allocations of the Space Research Service in the 15 GHz band. As far as I recall, the current preliminary positions of different regional organizations, they are all supportive to the upgrade. Let's see whether we will conquer the protection issues associated with that. I hope I could address your question, Mario.
Of course. Thanks very much, Alexander. So we see that 113 will be easier this time than the WRC-19.
Yes, very good. I didn't think about this.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. So our third and last speaker from regional groups is representing the Americas, so CITEL regional organization, and is Mr. Victor Martinez, who is the chairman of the working group for the preparation of WRC-23 of CITEL. Victor, welcome. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mario. Also, thank you, our colleagues from Forum Global, for inviting us to this very important meeting in APEC, APC region. I think that this is, as my colleague said, is very important for us to participate in these events in order to facilitate the discussions and the exchange of information among the regional organizations. In our case, of course, we are very happy to continue working in the right direction with the consensus building in order to facilitate the discussions during the WRC. In this sense, we participate in the Inter-American Telecommunications Commission, that is an entity of the Organization of American States, established by the General Assembly of this organization. In this sense, we include 34 countries for Region 2. The next slide, please. In this CITEL organization, we include, of course, North American countries, Latin American countries, and also the Caribbean countries. This since we have the large list of administrations in Region 2, is a organization that includes more than any other in our region. In this sense, we believe that is the right organization for discuss any multilateral issue accordingly with the CITEL mandates in order to facilitate our coordination and participation in the ITU meetings and conference. The next slide, please. CITEL is an organization that have three committees. The first one is the executive committee. That is, this committee take part or take the lead of the preparations for the plenipotentiary conference regarding the ITU, and have another task that deal with the executive issues. The other one is the permanent consultative committee of telecommunications. That is the committee one. This committee deal with all the telecommunications issues that are not related to the radio spectrum. The other one is the permanent consultative committee, that is PCC2, that is in charge of all the radio communications issues in CITEL administrations and its membership. Of course, PCC2 is in charge of the WRC preparation, but also the next slide, please. We have other groups. One group is, as I mentioned, the CITEL preparation for WRCs. We have other working group that is deal with all the terrestrial services. This group also includes our exchange of information and point of views for many of the ITUR meetings, including the study groups. The other one is the working group for spectrum management. Also, this working group is one of our spaces where we can talk and exchange information and positions for our participation as a regional organization in the study group 1, for example. The other one is a working group on satellite systems and scientific services. This working group also is in charge of all the tasks of the study groups 7 and also study group 4 in the ITUR. And the other one is the on broadcasting. This also follow all the ITUR issues in study group 6. Also, we have other two groups. One of them is in charge of our talk and also coordinate the strategic initiatives of the Organization of American States. And we have another one that is more administrative work, other group that is in charge of review all our resolutions, decisions, and recommendations that are outcomes of the PCC2 meetings. The next slide, please. According our preparation for the WRC-23, we have already our structure. This structure includes many experts in each of our agenda items, and also are integrate all our spokespersons or reporterships for each agenda item. About the chairmanship of our working group, we have two vice chairs. One is from Colombia, and the other one is from Paraguay, and myself from Mexico, that are part of the leadership of this working group. But also we have 5 coordinators that are dealing with these working groups. One of them is for mobile, fixed, and broadcasting. The other one is for radio localization, maritime, and aeronautical. And also we have one for science and services, and we have also another sub-working group for satellite services, and finally the sub-working group 5 that is according with the general regulatory and future work of the conferences, that includes, of course, the agenda item 10. We have one coordinator and also an alternate coordinator for each working group in order to integrate all our work regarding the preparation for the WRC. The next one, please. Accordingly, with our preparatory process, we more or less have 5 procedures. The first one is about the exchange of view that we call as preliminary views on the WRC agenda item. The second procedure is one preliminary proposal that is this happens when once an administration presents a particular proposal for resolve any of our agenda items. The third procedure is for the draft inter-American proposals. That this means that a preliminary proposal have one support for at least one administration and try to conduct all the consensus building in our regional organization in order to be an inter-American proposal that is once we have at least 6 administrations behind one particular proposal, we call it as inter-American proposal. And once we have a list of inter-American proposal for any specific agenda item, we of course send these inter-American proposals for the preparations of the conference in order to facilitate also all our job during the WRC. The next one, please. In this time, we have a list of our issues that our initial work are currently. In this sense, we have a preliminary views for each of these agenda items. In particular, for the agenda item 1.1, that is also deal with aeronautical and maritime, of course, mobile services, accordingly which with the studies mentioned in the appropriate resolution for the last WRC. We have that some administrations are of the view that protection of aeronautical, mobile, and maritime mobile services and or applications of the primary mobile services in the frequency bands, including this agenda item that is 4.8 to 4.99 gigahertz, cannot be fulfilled solely through application of the footnote 9.21. This administration support the study of the technical and regulatory conditions for the protection of aeronautical mobile and maritime mobile services in this band. And also we have another preliminary view for this particular agenda item that said that administration supports the appropriate sharing studies under this agenda item in this band in order to use as also identify for the IMT services. For 1.2, I have another slide. In this sense, I will continue with 1.3. For 1.3, we have also a preliminary views that in the interest of a global urbanization and economies of scale, some administrations support studies to consider a preliminary allocation to the mobile service in the band in the bands that are included in this particular agenda item that is about the region 1. In any case, any eventual changes in the radio regs must not impact in region 2 in order to not have any additional studies or proposals about the region 2, sorry. The next one is 1.4. For 1.4, we have also 2 different views. One of the views is that some administration supports the studies in this accordingly with the resolution 247, and some administrations consider that the modifications to the IMT identifications in several footnotes in the radio regs are outside of the scope of the WRC agenda item 1.4. According with the proposal of this meeting, I believe that is some of the most important agenda items that we can talk in this space. The other ones are also important. However, I will not go into details. We are in the process to update our website in order to put in this site all this information for facilitate the consultative process for all the persons that are interested in our job. We also have many other preliminary views for some others agenda items accordingly with the satellite and also the, the, the science services that we are also with some preliminary views in this time. The next one, please. For the agenda item 1.2, that there are also several bands in this agenda item accordingly with the resolution 245. There are different bands that could be studies for the proposed to consider its identification as IMT frequency bands. We have some of them for region 2. As you can see, there are a lot of bands that are under studies for region 2. Also, we have some other ones for region 1, and we have only one frequency band for globally studies. In this sense, we believe that this agenda item could have a very good outcomes for the next conference in order to facilitate more spectrum for its identification and probably use for these technologies. The next one, please. In this slide, we have the specification of each band. As you can see in the screen, we have the preliminary views for the first one that is accordingly with the resolution is under study for region 1 and region 2. We have that some administration support the appropriate sharing and compatibility studies on the agenda item 1.2 in the bands 3.3 gigahertz to 3.4 gigahertz in region 2, and also administration consider that it's deemed to advisable to follow in detail and collaborate as appropriate in the protection, sharing, and compatibility studies in the frequency bands for the proposed to achieving regional harmonization in the use of INT services without constraining the operational and operation services and applications that we have already in those bands. As you know, there are a specific allocation for relocalization services in this particular the first band, and also there are secondary allocations in region 2. In this sense, I believe that for the proposal of our region, we need to follow with the studies in the study groups in order to reach probably have a final position for this specific frequency band. The other band that is 3.6 to 3.8 gigahertz. As you may know, there are also a lot of satellite services in this band, and for that reason, we have also allocated this band for fixed and also for satellite fixed services. And of course, there are also allocation for mobile services. In this sense, it's very interesting for some administration support studies called in resolution 245 with respect to this band, including sharing and compatibility studies with the view to ensuring the protection from harmful interference in this particular band. The next one, please. For the other bands, as I mentioned, we have for region 1 also the studies in the 6 gigahertz band. In this sense, we have a preliminary view for some one administration that recognize that this band is only under study in region 1, and the 7 gigahertz is the only band that are under study and considered globally. And supports, I'm also informed that there are some support for license and SEP deployments in the mobile services across this band, therefore 5.9 to 7.1 gigahertz band, in order to inform you that some issues that are already happening in our region In this sense, we believe that this particular band is only under studies in the region 2 for its identification from INT proposes. We have also, as I mentioned, this band for 7 gigahertz, that is the only one that is considered globally, is very interesting for our region, that these studies could be conducted in order to facilitate the compatibility studies for the possible identification of INT in this band, and also must take into account the technical and operational characteristics of connection links for non-GEOS systems, also for the MSS that are currently operating as well for the future developments. Finally, about the band for 10 gigahertz, this is only under studies in region 2, and some administration support the appropriate sharing and compatibility studies under the agenda item 1.2 in the bands of 10 gigahertz in region 2. Of course, we need to continue working in the ITR study groups in order to conclude with the studies, and probably we can reach also a consensus for our region in this band. In this sense, we will continue working very hard in this process. As also my colleagues mentioned, there are some issues that could be concluded for next years inside the ITR studies. In this sense, once we have more detail of these studies, probably for our next opportunity, we can share with you more information about our regional organization. The next slide, please. I will also express our appreciation for inviting us for this very important meeting. Of course, we have a lot of job that we need to continue working. We will have another PCC2 meeting at the end of the year, and probably we can provide more information once we can update our website. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Victor. Very nice presentation and very clear as well. As you used up a bit more time, I won't have time for a question. So if you don't mind, we will just move on to the next set of speakers. Thanks very much again, Victor. So, dear participants, although the administrations that we heard from are the decision makers, and the other regions that were not represented, but administrations in general are the decision makers at WRCs, the industry representatives play a key role in the preparatory process, including the sharing and compatibility studies that are being carried out in the radio communication sector and other type of activities. So I think it's important to hear from them as well, what their views are. And we have representatives here from the mobile, broadcasting, and satellite industry that are ready to share their views about that. So let's start then with Mr. Glyn Carter, who is GSMA's Senior Spectrum Advisor, with your introductory remarks, Glyn, on what's the view of the mobile sector on the upcoming WRC-23.
Thank you very much, Mario, and good day to everyone. So I'm going to say a few words about WRC-23 and its importance for 5G in APAC. Next slide, please. So WRC-23 can have an important role in increasing the coverage and capacity and reducing the cost of mobile broadband. 5G can bring many benefits, but there's a risk that people without access to mobile broadband can be disadvantaged. The spectrum bands that are being discussed at WRC-23 provide an opportunity to expand digital inclusion and address some of these risks. 90% of the world's population is currently covered by mobile broadband, but almost half of these people are not connected due to barriers such as cost. Next slide, please. WRC-23 can provide solutions for the future expansion of 5G and to help solve some of the challenges associated with mobile broadband. These include increased harmonization for the global ecosystem, both in existing bands such as the 3.5 gigahertz band and also in new 5G bands such as 6 gigahertz. WRC can also help to reduce the costs and improve the affordability of mobile broadband. And it can provide wide area capacity, both on a citywide basis, using the mid-bands that have been discussed under agenda items 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3, and also on a wider area basis, using the low band or UHF band being discussed under 1.5. Next slide, please. If we look here at the bands that are being studied for IMT under the various different WRC agenda items, then we see that more bands are being considered for region 1 and 2 than for region 3. However, region 3 already has primary mobile allocations in most of these bands in most countries, and therefore it can take advantage of the benefits in terms of economies and the ecosystem resulting from the actions at WRC-23. This applies in particular to the so-called mid-bands, including the 6 gigahertz band, as I'll say a bit more at the next slide. Next slide, please. So if we look at some of the particular bands that are being studied at WRC-23, then the bands in the range 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz are already forming the main bands for initial 5G launches. And WRC-23 can help increase the harmonization of these bands and improve the economies of scale associated with them. The 6 gigahertz band has a critical role to play and will be critical in the ability to be able to meet the needs for 5G expansion and for increased affordable mobile broadband. The 4.8 to 4.9 gigahertz band is also can also be potentially beneficial, and indeed many APAC countries already are included in the footnote associated with this, so that will also be important. And I'll also, in addition to the mid-bands, briefly mention the sub-1 gigahertz spectrum, which is being studied under agenda item 1.5. This has the potential to provide greater wide area capacity and reduce the digital divide. Region 3 already has a mobile allocation in this band, so the countries in Region 3 are already able to choose how they use this band and potentially take advantage of the decisions taken at WRC-23 in agenda item 1.5. So in conclusion, WRC-23 can help achieve affordable mobile broadband for all, including in the Asia-Pacific region. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Sorry, I was muted. So thank you for your introduction. I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind. Which of the bands being studied for IMT and the WRC-23 agenda items are likely to be important for 5G, in particular in Asia Pacific?
Yes, thank you. That's a good question, I think. I think all of them have the potential to be important, but maybe if I highlight two in particular, the bands in the range 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz are already being used as the initial bands for 5G rollouts in many, if not all, countries, and the WRC-23 has the ability to increase the economies associated with those bands and improve the ecosystem. So I think those bands around 3.5 gigahertz are already very important for 5G, but there will need to be clearly additional spectrum for expansion of 5G in the future, and for that I think 6 gigahertz is to our mind looking at the most attractive alternative and the most practical alternative in order to achieve that expansion in the future. But indeed, the other bands such as 4.8 to 4.99 gigahertz and UHF also have a potential role to play as well, I believe. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Glyn. So our next speaker is Elena Huygrefagut. I'm sorry, I always have trouble with your last name, so it was not too bad. She is at the EBU, at the European Broadcasting Union, in the Technology and Innovation department. And so welcome, Elena, and please provide us with your introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Mario, and good evening to Asia, good morning to America, and good afternoon to Region 1. And thank you also to Forum Global for inviting me to speak on behalf of the EBU. As you said, Mario, we can see in the next slide that the EBU is the European Broadcasting Union, which is the world leading alliance of public service media. We have many members that operate over 2,000 television and radio online channels and services and offer a wealth of content across other platforms. Together, they reach an audience of more than 1 billion people around the world, broadcasting in 159 languages. EBU members are key producers of content in their markets and are central to the response in case of emergency situations like the COVID crisis. So as you can see in the next slide, I will focus my presentation in one agenda item, the one that is the key one for Region 1 for broadcasters. We have also other key issues regarding satellite bands, but Mohammed, my colleague, will speak about that. So we'll focus only on this agenda item. This agenda item, which affects Region 1 only, will review the use of the UHF band between 470 and 6 and when we go up to 960 megahertz, we'll check all the spectrum use of the existing services there, and then we'll do sharing studies, and then we'll focus on the regulatory options in the part only on the lower part of the band between 470 to 694 megahertz. And why here is because if we look to what happens in Region 2 and Region 3, we see that in Region 1, this band is only allocated to broadcasting on a primary basis. There is no other allocation. We see that in Region 2, we have a secondary allocation to the mobile service, which becomes primary via footnote in some countries. In the same situation, a similar situation in Region 3, where you have a primary allocation to the mobile together with the broadcasting allocation, and you have also a footnote that provides primary allocation and IMT identification in some countries. So the question is, will Region 1 add a primary allocation to the mobile service in this part of the UHF band and identify, allocate for IMT? So it's interesting to go backwards, and you can see in the next slide that in Region 1, in 2006, we planned the whole of the UHF band between TV channel 21 to channel 69. These 49 channels were planned for digital terrestrial television. This band was allocated on a primary basis only to broadcasting service. What happened in the next conference? And that was a regional conference between Region 1 and Iran. And at the WRC 2007, there was a discussion on the upper part of the UHF band. Do we allocate this band to mobile or not? Is what happened. The 800 megahertz band was allocated to the mobile service on a primary basis. And what happened is that due to the difficulties to share from a technical point of view between mobile and broadcasting services had to stop and going down to the band to try to recover the services that were lost. In 2012, again, there was the 700 megahertz discussion, another slide of this band that was allocated to mobile service on a primary basis, and broadcasting services had to stop from the use of this band and go down. So in 2015, there was again the discussion that in region 1, there was no decision, and they said the countries, okay, we need some more time, let's come back to our WRC-23. And this is what will happen at the next conference. We'll see if we allocate this band to the mobile services or not, and if there is any identification for mobile services. So in the next slide, we can see how important is this band for us, for the broadcasting community. We know that for digital terrestrial television and for audio production, rely in this frequency range. There is no other frequency range that could be used for DTT or that could be used for most of the radio microphones and audio production services. In region 1, DTT has been launched in 106 countries, and they are covering over more than 1,000 million households. And in particular, in the EU, we have 250 million viewers, which is huge. Of course, the audience is different from country to country, but it's a really huge audience that we have there. And in particular, for public service media, it's also very important, DTT, because it provides near and universal coverage. We have free-to-air. The platform is very resilient in times of crisis. It's very efficient to deliver media content to mass audiences. Public service broadcasters would remain prominent. There are no gatekeepers, so really crucial platform for the public service media. And today, there is no other single platform that can provide the same public value to the society that is provided by DTT. So for us, we can see in the next slide that the future use of the UHF band needs to be for innovation. We think that the real value of 5G that can generate is really in the vertical. It's not providing more or the same as 4G, but it's really the verticals that will provide an added value to the society. Broadcasters were developing what we call 5G broadcast to enhance our offer. And 5G broadcast is one of the key verticals for the media ecosystem. We can generate societal value to the UHF band. So I think that regulators, when they discuss the future use of the bands, and in particular now discussing the future of the UHF band, they need to consider the societal value that future use can generate in not only the economic value. The economic value is super important, of course, but we should not forget the value for the society, the value for the public, the value for all the citizens. Important to remind that 5G broadcast can be introduced in the UHF band together with the Geneva 6 agreement. The Geneva 6 agreement was the agreement that was done in 2006 for digital terrestrial television, and is compatible with DTT and is compatible with PMSC. PMSC is the audio production services. So for us, innovation and flexibility in the UHF band do not require any changes to the ITU radio regulations at WRC in region 1. We can keep the same radio regulations using the band for new services without making any changes and being compatible with DTT and creating value for the society. So this is our main view on the UHF band. Thank you very much, Mario.
Thanks very much, Elena. Very good presentation. So what I see is that you had a very quiet WRC-19, but you are preparing for a very hectic WRC-23. So the broadcasting community is on the spot during that conference that is coming. Thanks for your presentation, which was very, very interesting. I noticed that you mentioned the 5G broadcasting. I think this is a new concept that we would like to know a bit more about. Could you just elaborate a bit more on what it is, and so that we can all understand what you refer to by 5G broadcasting?
Thank you, Mario. Yes, 5G broadcasting is a part of the 3GPP technologies. So it's release 16 that has been modified and to add some features in order for this technology that is in principle a mobile technology. When I said a mobile technology is a one-to-one technology to be able to be received by smartphones and mobile devices. So we have added some features to ensure that this mobile technology is adapted to the broadcasting service. The broadcasting service, what does it mean? It means that we deliver the same content to the whole of the audience, and should be received by mobile devices. At the same time, for public service broadcasters, it's very important that our technologies that we use are free to air, because we are public service value. So we have ensured that Release 16 and this part of Release 16 includes a receive-only mode, which is a free-to-air. We have also made some changes to the inter-sites distance in order to be able to be used by sites that are more looking to the broadcasting sites, which are higher towers with more power, and in order to adapt the technology and the signal to this type of transmission. So it's a mobile technology that has been adapted for the broadcast use, but it will allow us to reach smartphones and tablets. That is a bit more difficult with our traditional DTT technologies. So it's very, in a nutshell, I try to explain very shortly what is 5G broadcast. It's an LTE base, and we have agreed the ETSI standard, which has already been approved, and we're in the process now to introduce this technology in the ITU documentation.
Mm-hmm. Thanks very much. It's very interesting development. Thank you, Elena. So our last but not least, of course, the industry representative is from the satellite community, and is Mohamed Jawad, who works for Intelsat. So Mohamed, welcome. Please give us your introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mario, and greetings to everybody. Thank you to Elena and to Glenn for a wonderful presentation. So my name is Mohamed Jawad. I'm representing Intelsat. I'm the Senior Manager for Policy at Intelsat. And I'd like to give you a perspective from the satellite industry in regards to some of the agenda items that might be relevant to your region. So next slide, please. Thank you very much. So this is a sort of an overview of the outcome from WRC-19, and it's always good to maybe just start from the beginning. When we talk about 5G spectrum, we're always focusing on C-band. In fact, as long as I can remember, every WRC, after WRC, we have focused a lot on this band, and it seems now we have reached an impasse, really, where fundamentally, when you go above 3.6 gigahertz globally, the global situation becomes fragmented. Therefore, we cannot have a wholesale approach beyond 3.6 gigahertz. As you can see here in the gray areas, this is where 3.6 has been, I would say, globally harmonized to a certain extent. But as soon as you go above that, there is, a fragmented approach where each region has taken a different approach. There was a good reason, I believe, why after WRC-19, Region 3 in the Asia Pacific did not assign an agenda item looking at C-band downlink for IMT, recognizing that C-band is the most efficient, reliable, and economical medium for distribution of media content, with over 80 plus C-band satellites serving Asia alone. And these are providing today over 3,800 number of TV channels, generating an annual revenue of 56 billion in this region alone. But aside from the fact that millions of viewers are able to watch major sporting events using C-band and the quality of service that C-band provides, can you imagine what would happen if you miss a final goal or a particular moment in a final World Cup or any sporting event? You really cannot put a value on this. And this is where C-band has a role to play when it comes to the satellite perspective, because it really has that broadcast attribute that you cannot deliver with other technologies. Next slide, please. And the previous slides, I've shown you what each region has and what the outcome is and the difference from each region. And there is a point where harmonization becomes challenging. From the perspective of satellite and how it delivers services across the world, this cannot be better presented than when you compare the situation of FSS usage across all the regions in the world. This has created, for example, the need for Europe to consider C-band for 5G, primarily because in Europe, the FSS usage is limited to business or B2B type of services. In other words, these are FSS large teleports in well-known locations, and they can be protected. So mitigation measures can be applicable here. However, the same cannot be said when you look at Asia or Africa or Latin America, where the demographics, but also the subtropical regions rely heavily on the attributes that C-band usage brings. For example, ubiquitous terminals, mostly in unknown locations, are deployed there. And this is what we call B2C, or business to consumers, directly to homes. And the way in the downlink, you currently do not need to be licensed to have a dish on top of your household. It goes unregistered and recognized in many cases. These are millions of ubiquitous terminals that are today providing services, such as I mentioned, major sporting events. So developing measures and mitigation techniques is impossible when it's a B2C type of application. And that's why you see in regions like Japan and Korea, where the traditional use of FSS is B2B, they've been able to take a different decision or a different direction than other countries in Asia. So one size does not fit all. Every region is different, and regulators need to be mindful of this when they're making their decisions. Next slide, please. And we all agree spectrum is a rare resource. We all agree this is a fundamental point. Therefore, we should not be expected to come at each WRC after WRC and try to capitalize on more spectrum. In other words, taking a wholesale approach does not work because each region is different. If we do not do this, we risk saturating the demand for MNOs for additional spectrum, which ultimately leads to non-competitive auctions and lower auction revenues, and risks valuable spectrum going unsold in some cases or underutilized. And I'm happy to share some of the auction proceedings that have been taken place around the world today to demonstrate this precise point offline, and you'll see my email at the end of the slides as well. And now we're hearing about 5G technology being deployed within the FS service, which use spectrum today happily coexisting between FSS and FS. But when you introduce 5G into the equation for point-to-multipoint services using the FS, this creates a interference where we've experienced it firsthand from Intelsat customers, and this creates a lot of issues for us. And I'm alluding here to topic 91C at the moment, which Alexander mentioned from the CPT perspective, which is good to hear that they recognize there's no regulatory changes needed for that particular topic. So we should not take a wholesale approach to harmonization because each region is different. Next slide, please. So this is an interesting graphic here. What's the alternative? Well, there are alternatives, which I can discuss more about in my sessions tomorrow. But if you just look at the figures here, which shows the amount of spectrum identified for IMT by the ITU, the amount is around 1,072 to 1,500 megahertz, depending on the specific country. And from that amount, 915 megahertz has been harmonized for mobile today, out of which 336 megahertz of spectrum is yet to be licensed by IMT. Again, I repeat my previous message. It is not logical to keep coming to every WRC asking for more spectrum when the prudent thing to do is to actually utilize the existing spectrum that's available today. And we all agree that spectrum is a rare resource, so we need to be more prudent when considering spectrum. Next slide, please. This is my final slide. So with all of this said and done, the conclusion when it comes to WRC agenda items, while they're not relevant to Asia, I think Asia needs to be aware of them because at some point it might come to this region as well. And I'm alluding to agenda item 1.2 and 1.3, where mobile connectivity challenges in Asia or other parts of the world are not caused by spectrum shortages. We can see that there is spectrum available. It is rather the infrastructure, affordability, and the coverage. And I say this with the backdrop that satellite continues to provide critical services that cannot be provided by other means, and it will be welfare destruction to accommodate IMT in these bands, especially when the 3.4 to 3.6 gigahertz, which is yet to be fully utilized in this region, has not yet been utilized. Therefore, we advocate that WRC-23, at that point, regulators from this region should wait and see the outcome and then make their decisions. And before people accuse, the satellite industry of trying to block progress within developing 5G, I think there is a big role for satellite to play in 5G, where Intelsat, for example, is actually leading some of the discussion within the 3GPP work to look at how satellite can be integrated in 5G applications. And there are alternatives to regulators today. One of them is refarming 2G and 3G spectrum. For example, China is doing just that with dynamic spectrum sharing, which allows mobile operators to use the same spectrum bands for different radio access technologies, such as 4G and 5G. And also spectrum sharing amongst MNOs. Sharing infrastructure amongst MNOs is a much better way of highly efficiently using the spectrum with a lower OPEX. And there is other alternative bands in the millimeter wave bands where city centers such as China, North America, Europe, Tokyo have already started using millimeter waves to provide a cost-efficient solution for 5G speed. So there are alternatives to achieve a win-win approach and deploy 5G services. I hope this lays out the narrative for my discussion in the panel later on, and I conclude my opening remarks. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mohamed. You touched upon the C-band, the famous C-band. So I would like to ask you as a follow-up question, how do you see or what are your views regarding the future of the C-band in Region 3 in particular?
Thank you, Mario, for the excellent question. Well, it all depends on exactly what band we're talking about, but let's focus on 3638 gigahertz downlink here. It's clear that this downlink band is very important to Asia. There is a reason why Asia did not choose an agenda item at the outcome from WRC-19, but Asia needs to be careful because the lobbying of the mobile industry could well convince administrations to return at WRC-23 and ask for more spectrum or identify an agenda item. And in many cases, these agenda items sometimes get cooked up or formulated in the middle of the night at the last week of the conference, and we end up with the repercussions for the whole 4-year cycle. So we need to be mindful of this. But overall, I would say the future of C-band in Asia will ultimately be decided by the reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is, it is still heavily used. The propagation characteristics of C-band is still reliant upon in Southeast Asia. The Pacific Islands, for example, have no other means in most cases other than satellites. So, and then today there are over 80 satellites providing C-band services in Asia alone. So if you imagine each satellite costs around $200 million US, that's a huge amount of investment. And the revenue generated just from the media content is 56 billion annually. So I believe that there is a lot of continuity heavily used by C-band from the satellite industry within Asia. But we need to be mindful and we need to be conscious of each WRC and breaking away from the ITU. I believe having a harmonized framework within the ITU is very important for the world. And to see this pattern of individual countries doing their own thing, it would be very risky for many countries in Asia.
Okay. Thank you, Mohamed, for these views. I thank all panelists for their good introductory presentations. So let's put them all together in the panel for our discussion. So we'll go to the results of the polls when they are ready. But meanwhile, I have already some 2 or 3 questions that have come from our audience. So the first one is from Raul Viñales, and the question is that is it already defined what country is going to host the WRC-23? So I think I can reply to that. So yes, we have an invitation from the United Arab Emirates to host the conference, and it has been accepted by the ITU Council. So it will be in the UAE. We don't yet know in what city, if it's going to be in Dubai or in Abu Dhabi. So this is yet to be defined, and the host country will let us know which of the 2 cities will be the one. So we have also tentative dates that are going to be approved by the Council next month. And if you want me to share them with you, they are from 20 November to 15 December 2023. Okay, so those are the dates that the UAE is ready to host the conference, and they are going to be submitted to the Council in a couple of weeks' time. So this is good because this allows us to postpone the CPM, the second session of the CPM, for 1 month, and go to May with the CPM, the first half of May. And this will allow us more time to prepare the CPM text. So this is all very good news. So question 2 is more for the panelists, so that's good. I don't know who is the author of this question because it came anonymously, but it is about the 6 gigahertz band and the fact that some countries, not necessarily in region 3, but in other regions, are already starting to announce positions ahead of the conference. So the question is, what does it mean for the WRC process that some countries are already taking positions regarding the 6 gigahertz band? So who would like to take it? I'm sure Glyn would love to take it.
Okay, let me start perhaps. So I think this is, quite a complex question, but I think it's important to recognise that what do you mean by the 6 gigahertz band is one question, and I assume they're talking about the whole of the 5925 to 7125 megahertz range. Now that is a vast amount of spectrum, 120 megahertz, and I think it's important to break that down a bit in order to address the question. For example, in Europe, we see that they appear to be in the process of deciding to use the bottom 500 megahertz of that for Wi-Fi for our lands, and I can somewhat understand that decision. However, I think it's, I would say, somewhat short-sighted to be talking about the whole of the 1200 megahertz for use for Wi-Fi at this stage. I think there's a lot of.
Yes, Glyn, let me interrupt you if I may. So I think that the question to have sense means that the part of the band that is being considered at the conference, that is going to be considered at the conference, what does it mean that the countries already take positions on that before the conference? Not on the whole band, but the band that is up to discussion at the conference. That would make sense. That would make the question have sense. Okay. The rest of the band is, of course, not to be discussed at the conference, so there is no issue. So sorry for the interruption.
Yes, apologies for maybe misinterpreting a little. Yes, so I was just coming onto the top 700 megahertz, and I think it is unfortunate and premature for those decisions to be made at this stage, somewhat preempting what will happen at the conference. I think you have to recognise that if this spectrum is used for that purpose on an unlicensed basis, then unlike when you have licensed mobile networks with some management control over them from the regulator, then once that spectrum is starting to be used by unlicensed, it is very difficult to unroll that decision. So I do have concern about that, and I worry that in the future we will come to regret those countries that have done that, and that they may do that. I mean, we can look at the example of WiMAX, for example, where such decisions were taken and the market did not develop in that way. And for unlicensed usage for our lands, it's very difficult to reverse that once it's been taken. So hopefully that addresses the question a little bit better. Thanks.
Thank you, Glyn. So Mohamed, I'm sure you would like to tackle that one as well.
Yes, thank you, Mario, and thank you for the audience for asking the question. It's interesting because, in one hand, we support that every decision has to be backed up by studies and evidenced by sharing studies to demonstrate the viability of the decision. But if you look at the decision, and I believe the question is alluding to the outcome from some countries where, as far as I know, have all made the decision to go for unlicensed use. In other words, Wi-Fi devices, not IMT. I'm not aware of, maybe I'm mistaken, but I don't think that there has been any regulator or country that decided in the upper 700 megahertz under the bands being studied for 1.2. These countries have decided that they should go for IMT. In fact, they've decided to go for unlicensed Wi-Fi use. And this brings up an interesting point. Why have they decided that? I believe part of the reason is because they recognize that there is sufficient spectrum now identified for IMT, whether it's in the lower bands, mid band, or the higher bands. And really, there might not be any more justification for more spectrum. So they've looked at other alternative technologies. What's also interesting is a lot of the offloading, especially with the pandemic, and we've been working remotely, everybody's been at home. In fact, I'm connected right now through a Wi-Fi connection. I believe most consumers are always going to look at the most cost-effective way of offloading their traffic. And Wi-Fi is the cost-effective way of doing it because it is free, provided a monthly payment is provided. But it's certainly much more cost-effective. So I believe regulators are capitalizing on that, and they're looking at the benefit that Wi-Fi is bringing to offload and cater for that demand. So it is quite interesting to see some countries have taken that decision.
Yeah, thank you, Mohamed, as well. I think that the question makes sense in terms of if we have an ITU WRC process that is leading to the conference, for the conference to make decisions, and some countries are taking decisions ahead of the conference, so is that making any sense? So, well, of course, countries are, let's say, free to make any decision. As I said this morning in my opening remarks, this particular decision about licensing part of the 6 gigahertz band is a decision that doesn't require a modification to the radio regs. So it doesn't need a conference for them to take this decision, so they can do that, of course. In an ideal world, we will wait until the conference and see what the decision of the conference is, and then each country would go ahead and go accordingly. But there are countries that want to have some clarity in what they offer or what they would like to offer, and they don't want to wait that long. So it's a human behavior. It's part of the let's say prerogatives that a country has at the national level, and I don't see it harms the WRC process, which is the question. It doesn't harm the process, and even more so for decisions that doesn't need a change of the radio regulations. So I think we would have now the results of the poll to show. So maybe this could inject a bit more content into our discussion. So this is the result of the poll on the most prominent issues at WRC-23, and we have the comparison between what we have today as result and what we had in August last year, in the last conference of Asia Pacific. So in the first one, 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz IMT, today, only 20% said that it's going to be a prominent issue, while 34% said that last year, while the 6 gigahertz band, which is what we are talking about, grew to 40% out of 25% last year. So the 4.8499 remained unchanged. The fixed IMT studies practically the same. A revision of the UHF band grew also, doubled in terms of importance, although it is for region 1. The Earth stations in motion, this is surprising. I mean, this went to half according to the audience. The tips remain more or less the same. The new mobile satellite IoT activity, no interest at all. And well, I guess it's not only 1 year later, it's also probably a different group of people. But it's interesting, this type of results. So I would ask you if you want to comment on any of them now that you see the result of these polls. Would you like to go?
Maybe I can go first, Mario.
Yes, sure.
I mean, it's very hard to interpret this. It really depends on the subtleties behind the question. But if I just look at the interest on the downlink C-band 3338, it's quite interesting that the interest has gone lower than the last year. Maybe perhaps in this region people are really have had enough of looking at the downlink, because it's been heavily discussed for many years. But it's really hard to say based on just the percentage of the numbers. What is interesting is that the 6 gigahertz has gone up. It's interesting because in region, when it comes to agenda item 1.2, it's only 100 megahertz that's available in this region. So it is quite interesting that the results have gone up to 40% this year. So maybe there's more interest looking at that band. But yeah, that's my quick response to the survey.
Yeah. Thank you, Mohamed. Anyone else? Yes,
Yeah.
Elena?
Thank you, Mario. I think I'm a bit surprised, I have to admit, by the UHF band that has almost doubled, as you say. It's a region 1 agenda item. Of course, any decision may have an impact on the already taken decisions in region 3, but I'm surprised to see that the interest is almost double. Of course, as you said at the beginning, Mario, this is going to be one of the most controversial topics of the conference, and certainly for the broadcasting community is going to be a hot topic. We have already seen that in the preparatory work in the ITU and also CPT, that some countries have very different positions. It's polarized positions, completely the opposite. So it's going to be quite a challenging agenda item. But I'm surprised this increase of interest in region 3. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know if Glyn has some more light on that one in region 3.
Yes, Glyn, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First to say, I'm not surprised that 6 gigahertz is topping the poll. That clearly is a very important issue certainly for ourselves in terms of the expansion of 5G in the future, but also for other industries as well, it would appear. In terms of the question from Elena, I'd be interested to know, the breakdown of those results, because I'm guessing that some of the people who are voting are not actually sitting in region 3, but are maybe watching this from other regions. So I'm not sure how much we can talk about the regional split, but I'd probably pass that question to Dan in terms of who's actually voting here. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Glyn. Yeah, I think all of you made good points. I think that also there is an issue because all the polls in all the regions that are being done by Forum Global have the same characteristic of having a global audience, if you want, although there is always a majority from the region concerned. I think that this also can be interpreted by the topics that are getting more clear, because I do think that the C-band will be a prominent issue, and this has not declined in terms of prominence, but maybe it has declined in the minds of people because it's becoming more clear what is going to happen, and then they value as most prominent those that are not that clear of what's going to happen. That's another interpretation. Anyway, the 6 gigahertz band, I agree, that is one of the hottest issues for the conference, not only because it's important for the AMT community, it's also very important for the unlicensed community that is working very hard to get this part of this band, if not all unlicensed, for unlicensed use, as we said. So these are very interesting results. So let me share with you that there are no slides prepared for this, but the other question that was on if you thought, if the audience thought that the IMT related issues were going to dominate the conference again, then the 50% of the responses were yes. So the others are split with a great majority of there are other issues, 44%, and then others that make up to the 100%. So we can say that the majority of the people in the audience think that the IMT issues will dominate the conference again. So we don't have any more questions from the audience. So what I would say is that as we have 3 minutes left, and you are 3, I would give you 1 minute to wrap up, if you so wish, as a final remarks. So let's start in the opposite order that you spoke. So Mohamed, you can go first.
Thank you, Mario. So I haven't prepared it yet, but I'll give it a go. So yeah, essentially, I'd like to give my closing remarks to say that regulators really need to consider efficiently using the spectrum. It's a rare resource. It doesn't grow on trees. We all know that. And before making decisions, first we need to stick within the ITU family, because that is an important organization for us. It's operated so well throughout the decades. Number 2, to utilize the efficient spectrum, we need to look at what is available today. How can we use it? There are alternatives to just looking at the agenda items. There are existing spectrum that can be licensed, that's not yet licensed. And that's the prudent thing to do before we can move into looking at new territory of spectrum. And also there are alternatives to different technologies, a holistic approach between licensed, unlicensed, satellite and terrestrial. All of this is a holistic ecosystem which needs to be considered by regulators, rather than looking at one particular technology that would perceivably answer all the questions, in particular the digital divide, where I think you need to have a cross mix of technologies to encompass all the citizens and provide connectivity to everybody. So I believe that's a fundamental message that regulators need to be mindful of. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohamed. Elena?
Thank you very much, Mario. So similar message from my side. I think regulators have a very difficult task, because they have to balance the requirements from different users, and they have to find an equitable solution for all. But I think it's very important that they look to the studies. I think most of the studies that we have to prepare are to look at the existing use of the different services and the real need for the future. And then how they can share the spectrum. As said, I mean, the spectrum is a limited resource. We need to increase the share of the spectrum, and to see how we can share more and more the spectrum, because there will be the problem in the future. We need innovation, we need to make room for new services, but the spectrum is limited. So we'll need to see how we can all share the spectrum and try to find solutions for all. And regulators will need to balance the needs of the different services, not just to put all the spectrum on one side, but really to try to ensure that they can balance the need from different services. It's a difficult task, so I'm happy not to be a regulator. Thank you, Mario.
Thank you, Elena. Glyn?
Yeah, yes, thank you. So I certainly agree that these are going to be difficult discussions on many of these agenda items. But I think WRC-23 is very important for the future of mobile broadband. We need to have the right decisions taken, and a key word I think which comes up here is affordability. So although Asia Pacific doesn't have so many bands that are being studied for IMT, there will still be a big impact in terms of the impact on harmonization and economies of scale and the development of the ecosystem, which in turn will lead to hopefully the ability to have affordable mobile broadband services for all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Glyn, and thank you all. I think it was a most interesting panel discussion. I think that at the ITU we carry out the technical studies, and those are much more difficult to socialize than these considerations that we've had. But I think it's not only about technical issues, it's also about these other aspects that you have highlighted, the political, societal, and the interest of the various sectors of the industry and the population. So I think all those are weighed by the regulators when they make decisions at WRCs. So this kind of discussion is also very rich, and I think it's very useful for them as well. So thank you very much for this panel, and thank you to Forum Global for organizing this session. I was very honored to moderate it, and I wish you a very good continuation of the event. Thank you very much. Dan, over to you.
Thank you.
Mario, thank you very much. And yeah, just to echo what Mario said there, thank you to Mohamed, Glyn, and Elena for some excellent discussion, excellent points made. And Mario, thank you very much to you, of course, for moderating the session, as well as I'd like to say a thank you to KJ, to Alexandra, and to Victor, who obviously gave us the overview from the different regions earlier on, and gave us a lot of information and a lot to digest on that side as well. So another really interesting session. Thank you all so much for that. Really do appreciate it. So that's just about it for today. So we have finished the 3 sessions today. We've covered a lot of ground, and hopefully you've enjoyed the sessions that have taken place. Thank you to all of you out there for all of your questions and comments during the various sessions. All of the sessions have been recorded, and all of the presentations have also been made available by speakers. You'll be being sent an email very shortly with a link to how to access that, how to access those recordings and catch up maybe on anything that you have missed. So we're back again here tomorrow, and we're starting 30 minutes earlier tomorrow. So we're starting tomorrow at actually, no, I think we're starting at the same time. So ignore that. Apologies. We're starting at the same time tomorrow. So same time, we're starting at 1 o'clock again, which is Bangkok local time tomorrow morning. And we're actually going to be focusing on some of the key issues that were actually identified today in our survey question as being prominent issues for WRC. So we're going to be starting off with a session on the C-band and looking a little bit further towards other mid-band frequencies as well, between the 3.3 to the 5 gigahertz band. We're then going to be moving on to focus on the 6 gigahertz band. And we also have a session moving a little bit higher in the frequencies and looking at the millimeter wave band. So all of those to come tomorrow as plenary sessions. We also do have our second set of showcase sessions happening tomorrow. So 3 more showcase sessions again for you to follow tomorrow as well. So once again, thank you to all of our speakers, all of our panelists, and all of you out there for participating today. I've certainly enjoyed the discussions. I hope all you have as well. Looking forward to seeing you all back here tomorrow for the next set of discussions. In the meantime, wishing everyone a very pleasant evening or a very pleasant rest of the day for those of you watching in earlier time zones. And as I said, looking forward to seeing you back here again tomorrow. Thank you very much, everyone, and goodbye.